Alex and Max are away for now, but they'll be back sooner than you realise. In the meantime, we provided you with some good clips that haven't really dated.
Nadine Dorries can barely string a sentence together. I mean, her auto cues seem to have got smaller and smaller.
For a change, a man who is going to clear up a woman's mess. That's Rishi's vow as he enters number 10. As you were, Sunak's stability extends to the cabinet with the big beefsteak and all cages but Braverman back at home in the Home Office. Sorry, I've just completely messed up.
But have you read the plot? Oh, it's a page turner. It's a page turner. None of it is based on reality, but then nor is a lot of modern politics. But it is fascinating. And comparing the plot and Spare, or what's the other dreadful thing that's come out recently? There's one other one that has come out, and there's no comparison. The plot is readable. Spare is not, except to learn about the Todger cushion. But please don't go there. I was riveted by the plot. I couldn't stop turning the pages. But I think
did you read the whole thing? And how long did it take?
About 2 hours or so. I mean, I don't think I didn't dwell on any page. I was fairly rapid. Did
it reflect politics or her personal life? I've got no clue about it.
It was one stage racier than her novels. But
did it involve someone with blonde hair?
It did involve a lot of
quite portly.
Yeah. I don't think I'm trying to remember now whether I projected it, but I don't think there was any reference to the sofa. But there was a reference to a billiards table, which was
my goodness.
Yeah. Let's change that subject.
Yeah. So sorry. But anyway,
Hey, you didn't write it.
Well, I don't think she did either. But I can't say that, can I? Whoops.
Chat GPT or actual ghostwriter, do you think?
I don't know, but so from a professional point of view, I mean, I spent my life looking at text and trying to work out who wrote it first, textual analysis, and I've always prided myself on knowing when a student is cheating, and sometimes I just let them get on with it. But when I look at Nadine Dorries' novels, and I've read all of them, I read them all while I was sort of going in for cancer surgery. I thought, I've got to do something useful, and they were a riot. So when I read those, and then I look at her tweets, and then I look at the plot, there is no common thread. They all have a different style. I mean, there are little moments where you think, oh yeah, that's a familiar phrase, or that's a familiar rhythm in the sentence. But I look for rhythms, and the rhythms are all over the place. They're different rhythms in each in each oeuvre. So either she's got particular periods like Picasso, and this must be the gold period. But I don't want to speculate on the periods of Nadine Dorries. But yeah, it's I don't know what's going on there. So I wouldn't like to say that one is a ghost, one has been ghost written and another one has not, because
of course these are all allegations.
Yeah, I couldn't identify what the original is, because if you remember, if you remember that brilliant speech she gave in Parliament where she talked about the responsibility of an MP.
I put my constituency before my party. I think it is vital that these amendments are voted for. I think it's vital because some of the arguments that have been put forward tonight, that, so many people, you could be removed from your constituency because of your position on a particular policy. If you're a good MP, that's nonsense. That you could be removed because there was a political row against you. I can assure you that the 766 people who I am sure signed that petition were all members of the opposition. So it isn't enough. It's like, during the 2009 expenses crisis, one thing we did know was this, that everybody nationally hated MPs, but when it came to a constituency by constituency basis, many constituencies said, well, we don't like MPs, but our MP's okay. And that's because they know what you do for them. They know the type of person you are. Where MPs do fall down is when they ignore their constituents.
It's bewitching, and I thought this is this is somebody to watch. So when she was appointed a minister, I thought, oh, this is interesting. She's got a background in writing. She's got that passion, and she was useless. And I thought the same sort of thing about Jenrick. I thought, oh, he's somebody to watch. And when he actually got power, he was horrible. It was the Braverman was another one. And so clearly I can't choose people, because the people that I choose let me down immediately in the political arena. And so yeah, I clearly I'm useless.
No, 100% not. I no, can't have that. I will say this:
people get.
There was something interesting when she was sports minister, where she managed to almost fluff up the description of every single playing field.
What's your department? What do you do?
So I'm Secretary of State for the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport, which means that we're responsible for making sure you have superfast broadband in your home. That means you can downstream your movies. We're responsible for making sure the internet's a safe place for you to go to. We want to make the internet in the UK the safest internet in the world. We're responsible for everything to do with sport, for making sure you've got football pitches and that you have tennis pitches in your communities where you can play in exercise your sports, museums, theatres, culture, music. It's a huge department, very diverse, so much in there, and a lot of it relates to you.
Yes, that each sport used. That was almost like spectacular.
Oh, yeah, but she
was nonsensical.
She also mixed up rugby league and rugby union in the same speech. In the same speech. I live in rugby, so I feel I ought to know. When I was a child, I was made to play rugby, and I don't quite know how this happened because I have haemophilia. But I think the school nurse probably just thought, take an aspirin, dear. I only survived because when the ball came anywhere near me, I ran in the other direction. and sometimes I used to crouch behind the big H. You know, there's these two big H's as if you're trying to learn a little bit of the alphabet on either end of the pitch. I used to crouch behind one of them and try and read pages of The Lord of the Rings, which I took on the pitch with me.
Good book.
So my image of Treebeard is quite distinctive.
Your personal image?
Yeah. it's letter H.
You're a Lord of the Rings fan, Max, aren't you?
Yes.
Do you think Tolkien could write anything as good as what's happening now politically?
I don't know. How would you write something like this?
Well, he's a fantasist. He's a fantasy writer.
Yes, but it's positive.
I mean, what Tolkien would start off with a language, and so each character or each group would have to speak a different language. And as we know, the right wing of the Conservative Party speaks a language which is almost incomprehensible. I remember when I was a student, I used to have dinner once a week with a man who had been the Labour representative of the area, and he'd retired. He'd gone into the Lib Dems. He was part of the gang of. Well, he wasn't part of the gang of four. He was number 5, but he'd been a senior minister, and he lost his seat. But I remember what an incredibly personable and wise man he was, and he was a gentleman. And I think in the cut and thrust of modern politics, a lot of that has been lost. I think they still exist.
I don't know if you've
not in the Jacob Rees-Mogg
no
version.
But I'm just, as you mentioned, I think of a Conservative MP, Simon Hoare, who was the former chair of the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, and somebody who really understood what was going on in Northern Ireland and took a very fair and firm approach.
I also think that Chris Heaton-Harris is probably the best thing that the Conservative Party could have handed over to Northern Ireland at the moment, and he's done miracles to patch up the mess that was left in Northern Ireland by Brexit. Because Lord Frost, I use the word stupid occasionally, and I think that's the line to use. Lord Frost is monumentally stupid. He left out 2 things which had to be dealt with if Brexit was going to survive. One was finding an alternative to Dublin 3 to stop the boats, and the other one was finding a formula to ensure that Northern Ireland was at least related to Ireland, the island of Ireland, as well as secure within Britain, and he did neither.
There was never a way that could be done. I can't.
Well, The compromise that Chris Heaton-Harris seems to have got is about as good as you can get, but it was significantly better than the rubbish which Boris came up with.
Yes.
That was total tripe.
But it's still not good enough for the DUP.
But it never will be.
Well, you could say it never will be. But the DUP were given such a taste of power by Theresa May that it's now gone to their head, and they're now uncontrollable.
But they're still voting along with the Tories.
Yes, but it doesn't matter. They're not instalment.
Yeah.
So they make a nonsense of the idea of local representation.
The only thing that seems to solve it was being in the EU. You had everything. It literally solved everything.
Being in the EU, yeah, absolutely. It solved it effectively. The nonsense of the independence vote in Scotland, when we were already in the EU, it was nonsensical to have an independence vote at that point. It's not nonsensical now, oddly.
Ain't gonna happen anytime soon.
But equally, I don't think that a vote for independence in Scotland would automatically propel Scotland into the EU. If it did, I mean, I would go back to Scotland immediately. I spent a very nice time in Scotland when I was an undergraduate, and I'd be very happy, except for the cold. But then, it's cold here.
I reckon they'd fast track it because the EU would recognize. Well, the EU would recognize so many things positive to come out of that, and I think the whole of Brexit would collapse if they voted for independence. I think that would be the end. That would be the thing that would just tip it over the edge. The reason being is that you would then start to get into an issue of having a border. You would also have the EU probably fast tracking for multiple reasons. One, because they would recognise that Scotland was yanked out with no say, even though they didn't want to go, and not just from the referendum vote, but also from the Scottish independence vote. Part of the promise was, if you vote out, you leave the EU as well, and you'll have to reapply, which would have caused economic chaos. And so there's that.
I think it's. I don't want to disagree with you too much, but I think it's important also to remember that the EU is like a ministry. We tend to look at the EU as like a country, and we can sort of negotiate with it, and it would treat Scotland in a different way because of the history and stuff like that. I think if Scotland became independent, it would join like any of the other nations. There may be some exceptions like Ukraine, but generally, I think Scotland would be treated like any other country that wants to join, and it would take a while. So, but it would already have in place what's necessary to join.
Yeah.
So it would be
So the problem it would face is the same problem that Britain faced on leaving Europe, that it would automatically have to impose a border and restrictions without any benefits at all.
And then they would have to do everything in their power to fast track back into the EU. I think there might be some sympathy within the EU towards Scotland because they were forced out and they had no.
Yeah,
I think there's a possibility.
Yeah, the difference between Scotland and Scottish independence and Britain and Brexit is that the Brexiteers had no idea about what they would have afterwards, whereas Scotland had a very clear idea about what it would have afterwards, and so that gives it a lot more impetus. I also, I have a lot of respect for Humza Yousaf, and I had dealings with him when I was exposing UKIP as racist, and but you know the story, I think.
It's a good story.
And Humza and I chatted, and he said to me, well, I've just had this racist experience, or I've just been racially abused by a UKIP MEP. What are you going to do about it? And I said, well, I'll resign. And he said, oh, let's go big. And I thought, that's very exciting. And I found myself slapped across the newspapers and wheeled off into the BBC for a session with Farage. And Farage said Farage wouldn't rebuke this MEP man whose name was Coburn, and so it's just a joke, and can't you take a joke? And I thought, well, when you confuse somebody's real name, Humza Yousaf, with the name of a criminal, Abu Hamza, is not a joke. It's a racist comment. And that seems to me to be the very definition of racism. I didn't intend it is not an answer, because you don't realize you're being racist because you're so privileged that you don't realize what you're doing, and that is racism when you are not thinking about somebody else, and when you are defining somebody else simply by racial characteristics rather than as an individual.
He was doing that in the jungle. He was having an argument with some of the other contestants, essentially saying, what's wrong with dressing up like a Mexican? And people were saying, I think there's a more nuanced and there's other perspectives, but the group was saying, well, it depends on how you want to reflect it. If you're taking the Michael out of them, then that's a problem. And then he said, and then someone brought up, well, you know, that's why they don't generally wear Native American headdress, because it's considered, it can be considered,
it's
especially in certain
appropriation, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's why you don't do blackface.
Exactly.
And then you can sort of see it was ticking over in his head a little bit. But there's this arrogance and there's this, I'm going to say someone who just thinks that they should be able to do whatever they want attitude. And there was an element and I think there's also an element of ignorance of knowing what the issue is and where it comes from. I doubt very much he's got a clue as to why there's an issue over blackface.
Yes.
I would be more surprised if he knew. I'll put it that way.
Well, there's a good question on the blackface issue. I mean, should you have blackface in what's the thing where you're hitting sticks with Morris dancing?
God, that's tough. Because some of that blackface is meant to represent pay. So the whole thing with that, I believe, I'm happy to be wrong on this, is that's meant to have pagan origins.
Yes, exactly.
And it'll be a reflection of that pagan origin, and then you get this sort of overlap between the two, where essentially you've got a religion which is Morris.
Then that wouldn't be blackface. It would be face painting. So
but it could equally cause offence, you see. But
then it depends on the context, because the point of blackface is the fact that you're saying, or at least its origins was saying, we don't want a certain type of person on stage, and therefore we're going to put a white person up on stage and mirror them instead. Whereas within the Morris dancing, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's because it's got a pagan tradition, which is thousands of years old. That's not the context as to why it was designed like that. Yeah. Unless there's something else I'm missing.
Yeah, you see when you come to the minstrel shows, which is what you're referring to, you've got the origins of that in America are clear, and there we can make a condemnation. However, when the minstrel show came to the UK, we didn't have that tradition, and so people blacking up on UK stages, particularly in the music hall, it was just people blacking up.
So there's more nuance to that. So Al Johnson, who is the jazz singer and was considered at the time in the Roaring '20s in America to be one of the most prolific cinema jazz singers of his age.
Yes.
If you read, he did blackface.
Yes.
If you read what he also did, he was able to go into Harlem. And he was allowed into what was supposed to be only black clubs.
Absolutely.
And the argument that was put forward was that he was demanding that African American musicians and actors also be allowed on stage. Absolutely. And he was using his power to influence that, which a lot of people
succeeded in so many ways. He succeeded.
Yes, he did.
I mean, you might say that was tokenism as well.
Yes, you could. Yeah. But
so it's a big issue.
Yeah, it's huge.
And I don't think Farage is up to debating that. I mean, Farage has spent 20 years learning how to talk about one subject, and he does it very, very well, and that's Brexit. And any other subject, if you get him off any other subject except possibly military history, he cannot talk. And so he's coming across, I believe, in Love Island. As I say, I'm not talking about this with any authority, because I took one look at his bottom and I haven't switched the program on again. And
you've gotten rid of your TV just to be on the safe side.
No, BBC.
But I think Tim, you raised a very valid point about how he only had one thing. But generally, most people are willing to listen. So most people are, okay, I don't know something, but I'm willing to listen to the experts, or I'm willing to listen to somebody else's opinion. But Farage is not like that. And my biggest issue with Farage is I don't know if he's really like that or it's all a show, because he knows he can make money out of it. He knows he can, if he doubles down on stuff, his supporters love it. And I don't know if this is all just, I know his history with the National Front and stuff like that, but I don't know if he's still like that, if he really is racist, or it's all just a pretense.
His history with the National Front is very interesting. There's the person who I think was his campaign manager in Brighton or wherever he was, Eastleigh or something, wherever he was standing the last time he stood for a parliamentary election, had a background, I believe, in the National Front or English Defence League or whatever it was. You'll have to check it up. But and my experience of UKIP was that the average UKIP member was definitely not racist. Most of them were disgruntled Tories, but that bureaucratic level above the candidate, most of them had a rather questionable background that I identified. Maybe I just met the wrong people, but I was alarmed, and certainly when I stood up and tried to call them out, I was extremely worried about the possibility of getting a brick through my front window.
Wow.
And I think had I not been, I would have delayed my actions despite Holmes's encouragement, and I would have caused more damage. But I also had to go back and teach. So I was due to go back to Russia, and I had to give some lectures.
You're watching YouTube's 13th biggest political podcast in the UK. You can now listen to us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And as you can see, we're listened to globally.
Last week, Savanta poll came out asking the question of which do you prefer, monarchy or an elected head of state? And for the first time that I can remember, the monarchy was under 50% on 48, and the elected head of state was on 34%. So a much narrower gap, and that passing that really important threshold of 50% on the way down. Today, in fact, we've just published a poll commissioned through YouGov, which puts them on 45%. So that's two polls asking the same question within a space of about 10 days. The polling is pretty damning. The people are simply losing interest and now turning against it. And in fact, all of the age groups under the age of 50 are now below 50%. So not just young people, it's all the young groups under the age of 50 are now below 50%. And some of those groups there are more Republicans than others. There's none of them that are actually majority over 50% on our side, but it is shifting in our favour.
We're going to have a huge shift, aren't we? We could be back in the EU with a proportional representation and an elected head of state in the next decade of the way things are going. Madge, what are your thoughts on all this? What, are you shocked by these polls? Isn't the monarchy just lovely and rosy and clean and fun?
I don't get to quote this often, but in the words of Nate Diaz,
I'm not surprised.
I am not surprised at all, because honestly, right, you know, like with the Queen, at least I think she had a lot more presence about her, and I feel like people liked her a lot more. She looks like her grandma figure. With Charles, it's just, you know, with that scene with the fountain pen when he's showing someone off.
Oh God, I hate this. Oh look, it's going everywhere. Hang on. Is anybody got a job? Where is that? Oh look, it's everywhere. Oh, there it is. Bloody thing.
It looked very ugly, and he's never been that popular with the whole situation with his wife Camilla, or whatever she is to him. It's just not good. I think optics is just really bad, and there's not many redeeming qualities of him, to be honest. I think, like, not in a mean way, but like, there was a lot of racism allegations.
Well, the palace is said to be furious after Prince Charles was revealed as the royal who asked about Archie's skin colour.
Bro, what are you doing? Like, that's, you know, like, you know, your first concern, especially as a grandparent, should be, is their kid going to be like healthy and stuff? They're going to be okay. Not, oh yeah, what shade are they going to be? Like, oh, dumbass. Like, it just, it don't make sense. Oh, you can censor that one if you want YouTube. I don't care about.
I mean, the Queen was the real deal in most people's eyes, you know, and she had been around for longer than most of us can remember, and you know, she was the monarchy. And now most people have never seen that transition. And a lot of people are like, hang on a minute, I was okay with it before, but now that I've seen you just walk in and take this job, that doesn't feel right. And he doesn't have that, you know, that sort of, he just seems like a bloke in a suit chancing his arm, and who the hell is he, and I think we've played a part in that to some extent by introducing all these protests, which have become sort of connected to his reign. So, we did some protests when the Queen was around, but almost immediately that he became king, people started protesting. Small protests in the week after she died, and then it started ramping up at the start of last year. And that's a new phenomenon for people to see, very visible yellow protests wherever Charles is going. And that suddenly made, I think, a lot of people go, oh, hang on a minute, this is something we can not like. It's okay to be against it and to protest against it. So, and there might be a reason why they're doing that. So let's find out and engage with this. So, yeah. It's and what's also interesting is that the polling is showing a big jump in the number of don't knows. So the YouGov was 24% don't know as to which one they prefer. Now they've shifted from liking the monarchy to don't know, and that means that they've gone off the monarchy. They're certainly questioning it, and they haven't yet really grasped what the alternative is. So that's the big challenge now, is to really sell the alternative as something which is bigger than just changing the head of state. And which kind of reflects what I think is now the prevailing mood, which is sort of caught up in what you were saying before about everything changing and PR and EU and whatever. But I think it's sort of shifting to a more progressive liberal sort of sentiment in the country. That's what I think is going on. And we saw YouGov poll today that it put the Tories on 20%, but for the under 50s, again, that same bracket, 10%. I mean, that is devastating for the Tories, and it is very. It tells a similar picture of this kind of tectonic shift in the way people are thinking about things.
Did you see that they shut down the Young Conservatives? It's gone.
Really? They ran out of 50-year-olds to start.
A young-looking 50-year-old, yeah.
There was a guy from the Young Conservatives interviewed. I know we're going a bit off topic here, but he was pretty upset about how the Tories have not done anything about housing. So, yeah. Graham, I just wanted to ask you a question. In a similar way to Brexit, is it the case that there's less support for the monarchy, but that doesn't automatically translate into people wanting a president?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of engagement that needs to happen for people to really think about it. And most people don't think about it and don't care. I mean, the most common response I get from people when I just sort of, chat to them casually, whoever I meet, wherever, is, and I tell them what I do, and they're like, yeah, but I don't really care, which is useful for us in the sense because I can persuade them more than people who go, no, I love the Queen. That will change when this becomes a much bigger debate. And we saw this both with Brexit and Scotland. I mean, as I said, we've got over 30% saying that they would prefer an elected head of state. Now, independence in Scotland was around 30% at the time they called the referendum. And it rapidly went up to 50%, dropped back slightly and they lost, but it went up. And Brexit was around 30% for a long time. And then rapidly went up and tipped over 50%. So the debate can make a huge difference. And we're talking about ramping up our campaign and carrying on. I mean, we had a spectacular year last year in terms of income and members, and we've got a bigger team now and all the rest of it. And if we can just shift that polling a little bit closer, and even if we can get neck and neck, then the pressure to actually do something about it is just going to keep building.
It seems inevitable, doesn't it? To be honest, there's too many controversial things happening. Epstein is not going to go away. We will be talking about that. That's not going to go away. I mean, the videos seem to be out there. Everyone, we've got witnesses saying they've seen them, which is shocking. But we'll stick with the polling and everything else. What would you rather have? I'm going to throw this over to Max. Max, because obviously in Ireland there is a president. In Italy, there's a president. Yeah. What would you rather have, Max?
Yeah, I think an elected president. One actually elected by the people. So there are the presidents that are elected by the Senate or by the Parliament or whatever. But I think a directly elected president would be the best. But also I like the idea of a symbolic president, not so much a political one. Like is in the Republic of Ireland. in Ireland. Sorry, is Britain ready for that? Do you think, Graham?
Yeah, I think so, and I think but again, it's about. I think that they are, but they don't hear enough of this debate, and this is one of the things we've been saying about in response to these polls is that the media need to have a more honest and frank debate about these issues, and the BBC, particularly the broadcasters, particularly need to start to realise that this is no longer, the 1980s or the 1970s or the 1950s, and they need to, catch up and start changing the way they deal with this issue, and people will engage with it and will change their mind. Now, I've done quite a few live debates where I see within the space of an hour and a half or an hour, people change their mind in our favour. So people do engage with it and do change their mind. And so last year I did a debate at the start of the year, which is in some kind of literary group in North London, about 100 people in the room, mostly retired people. And when we started, they did a vote, and it was about 25 of them were on our side, a few don't knows, and majority on the other side. At the end of the evening, they did a vote, and we had 52 of them on our side. And then about 7 months later, I did Exeter University, where there's about 140 people, and they allow you to, when they do the vote at the start, they also allow you to vote to abstain. So they say there's roughly 50-50-40 split, so 50 for and against and 40 abstaining. And at the end of the evening, there were 93 on our side. So people engage with it, they listen, they change. And part of it is because they kind of get that the monarchy is a tough sell. It doesn't help that the people that are selling it are not particularly, they don't do a great job. They're all these odd sort of loyal commentators that just don't really understand where the country's at.
They can't afford to.
Sorry?
They can't afford to. It's their income. This is the thing that I always see coming out of it, is the fact that these royal commentators, that's part of their bread and butter, writing autobiographies and everything else.
Yes.
I remember, is it Amy Robach for CNN had the Epstein story 3 years ahead of everyone else.
Yeah, she did an interview. She was really pissed off about it as well, because the royal family killed the story.
I've had the story for 3 years. I've had this interview with Virginia Roberts. We would not put it on the air. First of all, I was told, who's Jeffrey Epstein? No one knows who that is. This is a stupid story. Then the palace found out that we had her whole allegations about Prince Andrew and threatened us a million different ways. We were so afraid we wouldn't be able to interview Kate and Will that also quashed the story.
The level of power, and it comes back to what you were saying with the media. Like, there's only 4 big media outlets. The Conservatives stuck in a chair, which through some very dodgy dealing, which was an £800,000 loan from the chair of the BBC loaned Boris Johnson 800 grand, which is insane, and then got the position. And then the other 3 big barons who run about, I think it's somewhere in the region of 70 to 87% of the media. None of them live in the UK, and they don't pay taxes. And then on top of that, they're obviously easily swayed in one direction that suits their purpose.
I mean, I think the press is less of an issue because the press will follow the audience to a large extent. And also, I mean, we sort of got a free press. I mean, it's not free in the sense that it's controlled by a few oligarchs, but I mean, it's free. It should be free in the sense that they can say what they want, but they will eventually follow the audience. So if they smell where this is going, they'll switch at some point. But the BBC is the bigger problem because that's where most people get their news. And even if they get it from newspapers, that's where they get it confirmed, and that's where that's the source that most people trust. And their failure on this issue is, extraordinary. They really just don't get it, that they are being biased and deferential. And I mean, the stuff headline news, the 2 top stories yesterday for most of the day was Charles going into hospital next week was top story, and the next story was Kate being in hospital. And lots of whittling.
Sorry, how did Charles get into hospital so quickly? Is there not like a waiting list?
He's going private.
Private? How is that possible?
Well, I know.
Believe in the NHS?
No, unfortunately. He dodged a massive 600 million tax bill 18 months ago, so he's got plenty of money. So yeah.
Isn't it funny though? You brought it. I hadn't twigged this. Those 2 have gone into hospital, right?
Yeah.
Kate and Charlie Boy. But aren't they both the 2 people that claim to make? It's been claimed that the racist comments were made by
Yeah, I don't know whether there's any connection, but I don't know whether racism makes you unwell or anything. But yeah, I mean, it's just weird because the thing that Charles has gone into is it's incredibly common. But most guys of that age who have that prostate problem, they're on massively long waiting lists, and they're putting up with all sorts of difficulties and pain and whatever because of that. And so all they're really doing, again, I was talking to a colleague about this earlier, most people don't care about the monarchy. And so when they're in the news all the time, it kind of doesn't help them because it just annoys an awful lot of people. And when they're in the news with this, it's like, well, yeah, okay, we get it. People get ill. Why are you banging on about it like they are more important than us? And why are you telling us that they are just going straight into hospital for something which I'm still on a waiting list for 18 months later? So I think it's really not going to help them. And I don't think there's going to be much sympathy because they, if they were told, okay, he's got cancer and he might not live, then people would be sympathetic. And they're sympathetic in a basic sort of, wish him well kind of thing. But then move on, don't care. Because we all have these problems.
Sorry, can I ask a question? No, I just wanted to ask a question. There isn't really a rational justification for a monarchy. Like, I'm just trying to think of justifications people present. It's really just something like, well, it's a feeling or tradition or something like that.
It's because they're baked in and they've been there for a long time, and it's the way things have always been. That's the way people see it. It's the way things have always been. Why would we change it? And that's one of the mentality problems we have in this country. It's what could replace them. The idea that having a royal family stopped the spread of fascism in Britain. It's like, no, it didn't. And we outlawed, like, I think it was the brown shirts. Like, we stopped them being able to operate. That's one of the things that stopped it.
Yeah.
The monarch at the time didn't say, you guys knock that off. In fact, the monarch who abdicated actually met Hitler, didn't he?
Yeah.
After he abdicated, he met Adolf. Yeah.
He was a Nazi sympathizer. Yeah.
Yeah. So the argument of the royal family did anything to stop fascism is like doubt.
Well, have you seen Prince Philip at the Nazi funeral at the front?
Well, I think it's a bit more, but not to defend Prince Philip, but I think there was it wasn't as clear cut as that.
No, because it was his cousins that were married over to Germans who were in high positions in the.
He had family in Greece that married into the Nazis. Yeah, but there was there was a royal who I think was one of Victoria's sons who moved to Germany to become like the Duke of somewhere, and all of that was abolished in 1918. But he stayed in Germany, and there's I think it's the funeral of was it George V or whatever in 1936. You see the old black and white, and there's this one guy with a kind of a German greatcoat and a German helmet, and that's the British royal who's come back for the funeral. It's very odd.
It's a big context marker needed for that one. So yeah, let's make sure that's there.
Yeah. Going back to the point about the rational justification, I think there's a couple of things here, which is that there's a brilliant quote from Tom Paine, which he says that there's a long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives the impression of it being right. And I think that an awful lot of people are just in this habit of thinking that it's good and it's part of what makes Britain work. And therefore they kind of do a post justification. And sometimes they try and find rational arguments to why it should be there. So the best stab they have is sort of constitutional stuff about stability and independence and impartiality, but none of that stacks up. I mean, it's all nonsense.
They also try and argue the Queen generates a lot of money through people coming to Buckingham Palace and things like that. But it's like, they're not here to see the Queen; they're here to see the palace. If I rock up at Buckingham Palace tomorrow, I try and go on to the areas I'm not meant to, I'm getting arrested. But if you look at some of the other places, the former palaces, I was lucky enough to go to Germany once, and Sicilianov Palace, you can go in there, you pay like €12 or something like that, and it's stunning. It's absolutely stunning, and that's me actually. That building's actually generating income for Germany. Yeah, Palace of Versailles, beautiful from what I've seen in the pictures.
I mean, you don't have to go overseas. I mean, Tower of London is far more popular and far more impressive. And in fact, the opening chapter of my book is actually about. It starts off with tourism, and I talk about the fact that I took my nephews around Buckingham Palace, and had previously a few weeks earlier gone around Tower of London. And Buckingham Palace as a tourist destination is really, really dull because, and there's a guy, you probably heard of him, I can't remember his name, but he does a lot of history YouTube. He has like a history YouTube channel. And he said he doesn't normally do reviews, but not that long ago, he took his, or him and his wife went to Buckingham Palace. and he was just raging about how awful it was as a tourist experience, how badly they were treated, how little there is to look at. Because they don't want to tell you all the history of the royals, because it's not something which they necessarily want to share. So all you do is you go around with one of those audio things, and it just sort of lists off how many teacups they have and how many dining rooms they have, and it says this is the dining room and it's used to entertain guests, which seems like a fairly obvious observation. But so yeah, it's dreadful on that score as well. But the tourism thing is complete nonsense. But again, that is something which has emerged over the last 30, 40 years because people are realizing that the old sort of feudal values are sort of disappearing, and so you have to justify it by what money's going in your pocket, and that is not really washing anymore.
I think the whole tough thing's wearing thin as well. We like people who talk to speak well, mog types. I think that kind of love of that kind of character is dying off when people realize they're not actually that smart and they have no idea what they're doing. The only thing is they speak the Queen's English, or I guess it'll be the King's English. That's about it. But you realize there's not much else there. So I think the love of that character is dying. The only problem I see is I think people in this country, in England, love pantomime. They love the theatre of it. And Parliament is very theatrical because of the royal family, the sceptre thing and whatever other nonsense happens around that. Like the whole idea you need royal assent to pass a law. It's like, it's all formalities because the King's not going to say, I think you're signing that. You get a process.
I mean, no one ever sees him do that because he doesn't actually do it in person. So he sort of hands over the power, and some people in
it's an e-signature, an electronic one.
Yeah, but again, I'm not entirely. I mean, I think to some extent people like it, but I get tired of this idea that this idea that Britain no one does pomp and pageantry as well as we do. I mean, it just isn't true. And we were protesting at the state opening of Parliament. Now, if you're outside, A, there's hardly anyone there to watch it, and B, it's just really weird and boring. I mean, you're standing there, there's long stretches of nothing, and then a carriage goes past with a few horses either side. And one of the first carriages is got two footmen with the crown on a cushion in the middle. So the crown itself gets its own carriage, and then there's like some junior royal, and then there's the king, and then there's some other junior royals. And then they just sweep past and go in. And the bit in the inside is just bizarre and, again, not particularly interesting. And it's a very powerful symbol of the state, with us in our place, because it's the king and all the people in their ermine robes, the lords, and you can barely see the politicians who are sat at the back. So it's really not a good look.
It's an obscene display of wealth. Like I remember one of the American commentators I used to watch talking about the Queen's speech, saying, this person talking about how we need to tighten our belts is like, look at you with your gold crown and your gold scepter and your gold piano and your gold throne. It's like, okay, buddy, like, let's really, let's really kick, poverty. Let's really push poverty because you need to have all your nice things. It doesn't make sense, like, especially when you see the Queen's speech when it's in that context.
Graham, just to follow on from that, do you think that the cost of living has really driven down support for the monarchy?
I think it's certainly been a big factor in the sense that, as it was just said about, this contrast between their wealth and where everybody's at. And I think this is also feeding into the fact that the evidence is that younger people, as they're getting older, are not getting more conservative because we've had now, 16 years since the crash of 2008. And since then, it's just been cuts and austerity and cost of living crisis with COVID thrown in the middle of it all, and people are struggling to buy homes and they're struggling to make ends meet, and homelessness is going up, and food banks are out of control and all the rest of it. So I think that is really, really striking. And the problem is that, going back to the point I made earlier, that the Queen is the monarchy, and people would forgive her an awful lot, and they would push all the blame down the line. Now, either it was usually staff or flunkies or whatever, they were at fault for whatever went wrong, or it was one of the other royals. But people were happy to criticize Charles. But now Charles is on the throne; he's the one that can get criticized. It's okay to criticize him. And they're really floundering because they also then want to think, well, okay, we need to be relevant, and so they go out and talk about the environment whilst flying around in private helicopters.
He's been criticised for using private jets, so launching an eco-tourism project in Amsterdam seemed bizarre.
And then William uses big issue sellers as props for his PR. And there's one guy that he's now met 3 times in these PR things saying, oh yeah, this is my mate we met last year. So, well, why is he still selling big issue? And why don't you give him a room in one of your palaces? or a job as a footman or something. He's clearly not your mate. And I think people are really kind of getting slightly tired of their PR nonsense. I just don't think it works.
I think their PR is horrible. The royal family is that toxic that Harry'd rather spend time in Afghanistan and then leave the royal family because the way they treated his wife. Like, dude's like, sure, I'll go fight the Taliban. Like, I ain't dealing with you and this nonsense. And like the way they dealt with Meghan Markle was just really bad. And the fact that it was very leaky. For the first time in a long time, it's very leaky. That stuff was getting out. They were briefing against each other, and we could see how ugly it was and how much the media had the royal family had a stranglehold on the media. I think the mask kind of slipped there really badly, and they're not good at PR. Like you said, how are you like with the same homeless guy 3 years in a row? It doesn't make sense. Like, you could change this man's life if he was your friend. If he was your friend, would you not want to help him? And I think people just see them as deeply unlikable. There's no redeeming qualities in a lot of them. In terms of personality-wise, at least from what I read of Princess Diana, people actually liked her. She did change, I think, the stigma around HIV, which is incredible for a member of the royal family to actually do that. Politicians were scared of that, and she did it. She changed the conversation on that. What have the other ones achieved? Nothing.
No, and this is the problem, is that you do either fit in, and you have to fit in with everything that they expect you to fit in with, or you hit the wall like well, it's probably not the best choice of phrase, but you hit something with Diana, and then literally, but then Meghan Markle figuratively, and it all goes wrong. And neither of them were prepared to simply fit in. And it's very telling that the two women who are the most engaging and popular royals in the last 30 years are the two women that had to leave.
Yeah, and it's funny as well because of the racism thing. I mean, Piers Morgan. I think you were on a debate with him, weren't you, Piers Morgan?
Yeah.
He's a right.
Well, on the show, yeah.
Yeah.
It's on Good Morning Britain, or was this?
No, this is Talk
TV.
No,
it's Talk TV thing, yeah.
It's you and Alex O'Connor that seem to pop up and go on there and smash him a new one. And it's really funny. There's a clip of him actually talking about Meghan going in to a royal. This is Piers Morgan saying this. I think it was a load of clips, and he literally says,
she's mixed race, she's American, she's a divorcee, actress. Those are 4 ticks. No member of the royal family, the senior members, ever thought they would see having to be ticked when it came to Harry's bride. Meghan's marrying into a family which has, to put it mildly, a dodgy track record on race. It's not Meghan Markle's problem, it's their problem.
And then he's out on TV going, like a couple of years later going, I don't know anything about this racism. Like,
I quoted that line in the book, and I also quoted it at him on Twitter, and he blocked us. But
yes,
what a snowflake.
He doesn't like being reminded of it. But yeah, he said that it was in a documentary in the US, and he said that Meghan is marrying into a family that, let's face it, has a problem with race. And 2 years later, he was quoted saying, "Look, I've met all the royals, and there's not a single racist among them." So these are
Philip, whose cousins were in the Waffen SS. He was at the front of the funeral march, and he has said, I mean, I don't even want to repeat what he said, but he's insulted the Chinese, the Australian Aborigines, the Scottish, people in Papua New Guinea,
Indians,
and Hungary and Ethiopia. And you're going, right, but he's not a racist with all that evidence. Or it was Edward as well.
He was
pointing out he's a Nazi sympathizer.
People argue the racism. You have to, you don't know what's inside a person's heart when they say these things. So maybe he just threw them out there. You don't know what's in his heart.
I mean, they are fairly. They're not particularly bright people, and they also live in these very strange, cut-off worlds. I mean, I talked about lady Susan Hussey, who got into a lot of trouble just after Charles became king, where she was. I forget the woman's name, the woman from this charity, and she kept on saying, "Where are you from? Where are you from?"
Yeah.
And a lot of that is because they just don't understand that you can't do that. But it's very telling that if they meet a white person, the question famously is, "What do you do?" But if it's a non-white person, it's, "Where are you from?" Because they just can't compute. And Charles did exactly the same thing in 2018 when he met a woman who I think had Ghanaian heritage, Anita Sethi, and there's some Commonwealth thing. And she's from Manchester, so he said to her, "Where are you from?" And she said, "Manchester." And he said, "Well, you don't look like it," and laughed and walked on. And that's Charles. So that didn't make the news quite so much because it was, I think, the gap between the two was that the royals were very much centre stage in late 2022, and all of the racism stuff had come up through the Meghan Harry story, and so all of a sudden this story breaks and everyone's on it. But a lot of people's responses was to attack the person who had been.
They said she lied. They said she lied, didn't she? And she did all sorts of other stuff. She made it up, and it was taken out of context. And in the end, I think the person who asked her the questions resigned. The most recent one. Yeah, it is ironic that we live in a capitalist country, which is meant to be a meritocracy, but then we have people with all these inbuilt advantages who you cannot question, and they're given all the wealth despite getting crappy grades at A level. It's like, okay, like we live in a meritocracy then. Okay, I believe you.
But Rishi Sunak did the same thing. Do you remember he was in the homeless shelter?
What do you have? Do you work in a business? Do you want some
fruit? I'm homeless, and I'm actually homeless.
Almost identical to what the royal family did. It makes me wonder if that.
Are you in business?
You said, "What do you do for a business?" He's homeless.
He works in finance.
Just like what the? But it. Do you know what? Even with Brexit, I sometimes look at it and go, do they just want us marrying our cousins? Are they that?
That's the royal family problem. To be fair,
is that what they want?
It wasn't there the son that come out and said the Queen backs Brexit or something like that, and the royal family went, no, dog, no, but they couldn't say it. That's the thing; they couldn't say it publicly because they couldn't get it into be political. So they got played by the son.
I gotta say, you're not gonna like this, Graham. I gotta say, there's a couple of good moments though. Queen coming out with that blue hat and the yellow stars. I mean, that was pretty funny. And I gotta give it to Charles on this one thing. Broken clock is right twice a day. When he came out with the Greek tie, that was pretty funny actually. And then them going, no, it's just pure coincidence. It's like, he's ties.
He's worn that tie before. Yeah, and his dad was Greek. So, to what extent that was coincidence or whatever, it's very hard to know. But what I would say to all these things is that we should not be trying to distill messages from our head of state through reading tea leaves. If he wants to say something, say it or keep your mouth shut.
He did also mock Liz Truss, but we are paying millions of pounds for this man to make very subtle comments about the elected heads of state. The people who did a lot more to earn their positions. We've got a man who was born into wealth and power making comments about the people we elected. It's a bit weird that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're in Italy. I've just finished a book I've written on Mussolini for A-level students, and he got kicked out by the king.
Yeah.
Well, actually, he had a vote from his Grand Council, and then the king booted him out afterwards and had him arrested. But our king, don't want to call him that, Charlie Boy, didn't do that with Liz Truss. As soon as that happened, you would have thought if he was actually going to use his position, he would have gone, right, general election now, you guys aren't operating correctly. Let's sort the country.
You wouldn't necessarily want. I mean, that would be a departure from the sort of even the sort of republic. I mean, some republics you might be able to do that, but I think that the thing about the Italian king is, of course, yes, he booted out Mussolini, but he put him there in the first place 22 years earlier.
Well, we could debate that. I could debate that with you.
Well,
whether or not he did or didn't. I mean,
and
Mussolini pretty much flexed his huge muscle.
He sat there on the throne for 22 years whilst Mussolini got on with whatever he was doing. So he could have. He is not an innocent party, and of course there's a reason why the Italians then got rid of the monarchy. So just as the Greeks got rid of it or confirmed the abolition of it when they restored democracy, because their monarchies are just useless. And this is the thing about this notion that they are good for stability and defending against tyranny. They're not. Their number one purpose is to defend themselves against
self-preservation.
Everything else is secondary to
it. This is something that I also teach World War One, and it's really interesting because the German Kaiser, the Russian Tsar, and King George, although we could debate King George's involvement, but they're all cousins. Pretty much all between the three of them kicked off World War One. We can talk about Austria and Serbia as well.
Yeah.
But one family just caused chaos. And a lot of historians will tell you that was just a break. World War One and World War Two were pretty much one and the same thing. It was just a gap in the middle, like a halftime whistle. So it's quite interesting to see that doesn't come up much. But they were clearly involved, and they were all three were sending letters and telegrams between each other, trying to calm the situation down. And you're going, right, so Queen Victoria's offspring went on a mad rampage and lugged the entire population in, and now we've been picking up the pieces ever since.
However you put it in terms of their personal responsibility, it was monarchies that plunged us into conflict, and it was monarchies that were plunging us into conflict for centuries before then, because so often it's about the self-aggrandizement of the monarch and not the interests of the people that lived in those areas. I mean, if you look at the map of places like Prussia, and you understand that kind of weird construction of the Holy Roman Empire and the German state, these were not natural states. They were constructions around a king, and it was all about what was good for them and what was, going to self-aggrandize their particular notion of who they were. And there's this constant conflict. There's a reason why most monarchies are now gone.
There's a really interesting quote from a British officer who went down into the trenches for the first time, I think in the Somme, and he said, "My God, we sent our troops in there. Couldn't believe the sort of devastation." And I sort of think to myself, there's an interesting analogy with Lord of the Rings and with George R. Martin's Game of Thrones here, where it makes you wonder, if the king had been at the front line and had to be charging with the troops like they used to, it makes you wonder how many of those wars would have actually taken place. Yeah. And you know who the last one was? Would anyone like to hazard a guess who was the last UK monarch to be at on the battlefield?
Oh, let's go back a bit. No, I can't remember now.
How old are you, Graham?
I don't really go back to my life.
I would say in the 1500s, maybe.
No, it's more recent than that, I think.
Are you looking?
It was probably. It was probably
wait, tell us.
James II, maybe. James II.
Oh, George II.
Ah.
Oh, was it that recent?
Yeah. That recently.
And to be fair, they did offer the Kaiser during when Germany were losing World War I. They said to him, "You could go in there and do one last glorious charge with their soldiers." Like, yeah, no, I'm going to Switzerland, lads. See you later. So they did give him. They gave the Kaiser. They said, "Look, man, you can go out there. You can die on your sword. You can die in glorious battle." And it's like, nah.
Well, that's the Game of Thrones and the Lord of the Rings thing. You've got King Theoden, who leads the charge to free. Is it Minas Tirith? Yeah, it's Minas Tirith. And then there's also that amazing line from Jon Stark, who said,
"Will your men want to fight for you when they hear you wouldn't fight for them?"
I find that fascinating. But we can then bring in Harry and... Did William go in? No, William didn't go in, did he? Just Harry?
No, just Harry.
Yeah.
Why did William not...
There's a lot of talk about the way they do those things. Because, I mean, I've heard plenty of anecdotal evidence that Andrew, yes, he was in harm's way in the Falklands, but he was generally considered a liability and an absolute pain in the neck. And Andrew, Harry was surrounded by a platoon of... Gurkhas to make sure he was okay, so which makes him a very expensive soldier. But the one that I like is is Napoleon III, who I think was one of the last monarchs to go into battle in Europe when he got captured. So the Prussians went to the French and said, "We've got your king." So the French declared a republic and said, "No, you haven't." So which I think is a nice move. So. I'm slightly paraphrasing what happened, but yeah, I think it's a good move.
You've been listening to YouTube's 13th biggest political podcast. Try and help us beat that and beat GB News' number 12 by clicking the like and subscribe button. We'll be back next week with more compilations. Bye for now.
Be sure to tune in next week for another exciting story from the files of Police Squad.